Hi, welcome to The View from Washington with the Hindu. I'm Sriram Lakshman, your host, coming to you from Washington, D.C. This week, we're going to look at some of the big foreign policy stories from this part of the world. One is the unraveling of diplomatic relations between India and Canada, and the US has been involved with that too here from Washington. And two, it's quite quiet in the White House today. That's because President Biden is on a trip to Berlin where he's meeting Olaf Scholz and also has a meeting of the European Quad, that is the UK, the US, France, and Germany. We're also, of course, going to look at the main theme of this series, that is the race for the White House between Vice President and Democratic candidate Kamala Harris and her Republican opponent, former President Donald Trump. Over the last few days, we've seen tumultuous developments in international relations from this part of the world, with diplomatic relations between Canada and India completely unraveling. Each country expelled 6 diplomats belonging to the other country, including the high commissioners or the acting high commissioners. On Monday, the Canadian police had a press briefing in which they said Government of India agents were involved in a series of acts of violence across Canada. These acts included homicide and extortion. You'll recall that in September 2023, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada told the Canadian House of Commons that he believed Indian government agents were behind the slaying of Khalistani separatist Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Surrey, British Columbia in June 2023. On Monday, Trudeau and 2 of his cabinet colleagues, Foreign Minister Melanie Joly and Dominic LeBlanc, the Public Safety Minister, held a briefing. They repeated some of these allegations. Later in the week, Trudeau was providing testimony to a committee on foreign interference. He said back in September 2023, they only had intelligence, not evidence, that Indian government agents were involved. It's been over 13 months since, and on Monday, Trudeau said that his government felt they had to come public with these allegations because they wanted to disrupt the chain of events.
To share RCMP evidence which concluded 6 agents of the Government of India are persons of interest in criminal activities.
India has meanwhile accused Canada of playing vote bank politics. Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party has had to survive 2 votes of confidence in Parliament recently, and he's required to call elections before the end of October 2025. On Thursday, the spokesperson for India's Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi said that Trudeau's actions belied his remarks about his adherence to a One India policy, and that Canada was sitting on 26 extradition requests, including for members of the Lawrence Bishnoi gang. Trudeau had said that Canada supports India's sovereignty and a One India policy, but that does not make it illegal for persons in Canada to believe otherwise. Simultaneously, in the United States, there was a visit on Tuesday by an investigative committee from India looking into a murder-for-hire plot in which Indian citizens were indicted by the Department of Justice last year. The alleged victim in this case was Sikhs for Justice leader Gurpatwant Singh Panun, who is an active advocate for a separate homeland for Sikhs called Khalistan. While the US said India was not cooperating with the Canadian authorities, it confirmed that its sense was India was cooperating in this probe. The Indian government has told the US government, or so the US government says, that CC1, as the individual is called in the indictment, a government employee, no longer works for the government of India. One of the other individuals involved, a Nikhil Gupta, was arrested in the Czech Republic last year, and he's been extradited to the United States and is sitting in a detention center in Brooklyn. On Thursday, the US announced charges against a Vikash Yadav, who is CC1. He was a former research and analysis wing employee. In fact, the Washington Post had identified Vikash Yadav as CC1 previously. The FBI now has a wanted notice out on Mr. Yadav. It remains to be seen if the US will request his extradition. Now, the Canadian government has been working very closely with its intelligence sharing partners, the Five Eyes countries, which apart from Canada include the US, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. So while the relationship between India and the US is growing stronger and broadening, the United States has, not surprisingly, stuck by its longtime ally, its NATO ally, its G7 ally, its Five Eyes ally, Canada, a country with which it shares some 9,000 kilometers of border. So, another quick foreign policy update. The White House, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, was quiet today, and that's because President Biden left earlier today, Thursday, for Germany. Mr. Biden was meant to go to Germany and Angola last week, but the trip got postponed because of Hurricane Milton. The Transatlantic Alliance, Ukraine, Russia, as well as the Indo-Pacific and Middle East technology. These are some of the topics on the agenda for discussion between President Biden and Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, according to senior Biden administration officials. Biden will also meet with Scholz and other leaders of the European Quad, French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer on Friday. So Biden had a meeting with the Quad a few weeks ago in Wilmington, Delaware, you'll remember, with India, Japan, and Australia. And that was focused on the Indo-Pacific. But across the Atlantic, European countries are, also grappling with the possibility of a second term for Donald Trump. Speaking of Donald Trump, let's take a look at what's happening in the race for the White House between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. They've both been reaching out to demographics where they see that they could gain more support, and also the demographics where they've traditionally had support, but that support is eroding. Trump's been reaching out to Hispanic voters this week and Harris to Republicans. Harris has also been reaching out to Black voters and Trump to women voters. So Harris has the support of 78% of Black voters and Trump has 15% of that vote, according to a New York Times Siena College poll conducted between September 29th and October 6th. Now, in 2020, Joe Biden won 90% of Black voters, and 2020 was a very tight race. So you can understand why Democrats are very concerned that Trump has been eroding their support amongst Black men. Consequently, Kamala Harris's team is doing a number of events focused on Black male voters. On Monday, she unveiled an opportunity agenda for Black men. This includes schemes such as providing fully forgivable loans of up to $20,000 to Black entrepreneurs and others who have faced historical barriers starting a new business. She's looking at regulation to help protect assets of individuals who want to invest in cryptocurrencies. That will help individuals in the Black community. The details of this are a little murky, and she's also announced health initiatives that would look into diseases that affect Black men, such as sickle cell disease, diabetes, and so forth. And if elected president, she has said she will legalize recreational use of marijuana because arresting people on these grounds has affected Black communities to a large degree. The Democrats are also organizing events called Black Men Huddle Up, where celebrities will be present at watch parties to watch basketball games and American football games. So, as I mentioned last week, Barack Obama, the former US president, was campaigning for Harris at an event in Pittsburgh, and addressing Black men, he said, quote, "Part of it makes me think that, well, you just aren't feeling the idea of having a woman that's president, and you're coming up with other alternatives and other reasons for it," unquote. This statement did not go down well with Black Republicans who pushed back against it. So apart from reaching out to Black men, Harris is also reaching out to Hispanic men with a campaign theme of Hombres con Harris, men with Harris. She appeared on Spanish channel Univision for a town hall last week. Trump's support amongst the Hispanic community grew in 2020. For instance, Harris's lead here is only 56 to Trump's 37%, according to the New York Times Siena poll that I just mentioned. In 2020, Biden got an estimated 62% of the Hispanic vote. So we're looking at 62% in 2020 versus a possible 56% in 2024. Trump is doing well amongst younger Hispanic voters. While immigration and deportation are issues that work against Trump in the Hispanic demographic, it's not uniform across that demographic. For example, in some segments, some Hispanic voters believe that Trump is not referring to them when he refers to mass deportation. And, there are Hispanic voters, particularly those who are born and raised in the United States, who support building a border wall between the US and Canada. Secondly, Trump is doing well in general on the economy front. And this is also showing up in the Hispanic demographic, that Trump is performing strongly on the economic dimension. On Tuesday, October 15th, Trump appeared at a Univision town hall, and he was asked about who would work on all the farms if he was going to deport people. He dodged that answer, and he said he wanted people to come in illegally.
The terrorists and all of the others, the gang members, MS-13 gang members, and other gang members. We have to have people that are great people come into our country, but we do want them in, and I want them in even more than you do.
He was also at this town hall questioned on his remarks during the presidential debate in September that Haitian migrants in Springfield, Ohio were eating people's pets, people's cats and dogs. And he said, well, I was just talking about what I had heard reported. He didn't actually say I was wrong. And obviously this is not true. Haitians are not eating people's pets. The authorities in Springfield, Ohio have confirmed that. So during this Univision town hall, there was a voter who said that Trump had lost his vote because of the events of January 6th, 2021, the attack on the US Capitol. And this gentleman gave Trump the opportunity to win back his vote. Trump declined that opportunity, and he actually referred to January 6th, 2021 as a day of love. Now, Trump has pushed back on the notion that January 6th is problematic, and on other platforms as well, including just this week. He had an interview with the editor-in-chief of Bloomberg, John Micklethwaite, at the Economic Club of Chicago, and he sidestepped a question on whether he would peacefully accept the election results. Both at the Bloomberg interview and at the Univision interview, he talked about how he supported legal migration. He gets into quite a bit of foreign policy at the Bloomberg interview. The Watergate journalist Bob Woodward has just come out with a book called War, in which he says Donald Trump has spoken to Russian President Vladimir Putin 7 times since Trump left office. And during the Bloomberg interviews, Trump said he wasn't going to comment on whether he had spoken to Putin, and that if he had spoken to Putin, it was a good thing. He also talked about India in passing, saying India is very tough on trade, like China, like the European Union. He said tariffs, the word tariff was the most beautiful word in the dictionary, and he suggested that it was going to be his principal tool of economic policy, and by the sounds of it, also foreign policy. So if Trump has been wooing Hispanic voters, women voters, to some extent black voters, then Kamala Harris has been wooing Republicans. She held 2 events on Wednesday. One of them was in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Bucks County went to Biden in 2020 by a few percentage points. Pennsylvania is the most crucial state on the path to the White House. So that's the reason she was there. And she held her event at Washington Crossing, where back in the day, General George Washington crossed the Delaware River on his way to Trenton. The Battle of Trenton was a very crucial battle in the American War of Independence. And so there was a lot of symbolism in Kamala Harris holding her event over there. And on either side of the lectern were the words, country before party, and that was basically the theme of the entire event.
In the career of the folks who joined me on stage, one of the other things that we have in common is in our careers, we have each sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And so we know That sacred oath must always be honored.
There were about 100 Republican supporters, including former Republican lawmakers such as Trump critic Adam Kinzinger at that event. Kamala Harris was introduced at the rally by a lifelong Republican couple, Bob and Christina Lang. Bob Lang said he had always voted Republican, but January 6th was the straw that broke the camel's back. And Kamala Harris basically repeated her promise that she would have a Republican in her cabinet. She also said she was going to form a bipartisan council to propose solutions to some of the problems the country was facing. She praised the need, the necessity, and the benefit of having a two-party democracy and working across the aisle. So all of this was geared towards Republicans. She also didn't talk about abortion rights explicitly at that event. One of the ideas she dwelt on was Donald Trump being a threat to the country. She repeated his phrase, the enemy within, and his suggestion that he would use the US military against the enemy within. And she said that he would lock up nonpartisan election workers, judges, and journalists who are not doing his bidding. And so basically, after that event, she had an interview with Fox News, with Brett Baer from Fox News. It was a testy interview, and both the interviewer and Harris spoke over each other. She didn't quite answer all the questions at that interview. She kept going back to this notion of, I will follow the law. It wasn't a friendly interview. For example, she was asked about whether she still stood by some of the policies that she had supported in 2019 in terms of benefits that would go to undocumented migrants, driver's licenses, free healthcare, free university tuition, and so forth. And she said, I will follow the law. But she did spend some time, again, conveying this message, that her message and the Democrats' message, that Donald Trump is dangerous. And she brought up the phrase, the enemy within, that Trump had used. And Harris's campaign spokesperson, Brian Fallon, said that her interview was a way to convey her message to people she could not otherwise have reached on the campaign trail, and that it showed her toughness as she was willing to interact with a hostile interviewer. Fox News is the channel of choice for conservative viewers, many of whom would not have heard Harris's message directly. Another thing she said at this interview was that her presidency, if she becomes the president, would not be a continuation of the Joe Biden presidency, and that she represented a new generation of leadership. She suggested that she was not a Washington insider. You might recall that last week in an interview with The View, she pretty much said that there was no daylight between where she stood on policies and the Biden administration's policies. And so her statement on Wednesday to Fox was to rewrite that position, to differentiate herself from the Joe Biden presidency. And he's less of an outsider to Washington now, but over the years, Donald Trump has referred to Washington as the swamp. He's talked about career politicians and so forth. So Harris saying this is also her way, perhaps, of positioning herself to counter that argument from Trump. That's it from me for now. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.